Well, talking about unbelievable, I heard the most astonishing speech today from ABC Chairman Kim Williams. He told the National Press Club that we should give the ABC even more money if we wanted to become more patriotic. I swear to God, listen for yourself.
We stood back for the best part of 3 or 4 decades and allowed the ABC to lose 1/3 of its funding in real terms when its services have been needed more than ever before. We need to believe in ourselves, express ourselves with confidence, be creative in our response to big problems, have a set of common beliefs that can bind us together as citizens, regardless of where we live, what colour collar we wear to work, what our culture, gender or family origin may be. All the ingredients of what we used to call patriotism. It's an old-fashioned term, but one I personally like. The national task will necessarily fall mostly to the ABC.
Just wow. I mean, let's overlook all these race and gender divisions and be patriotic. Now, I totally agree that we do face a national crisis. I mean, I have warned for years that we've let identity politics and mass immigration, corrupt multiculturalism and a toxic retelling of our history, all of that tear Australians apart. And you just look today. I mean, the race politics that's dividing us. In a federal parliament, for instance, disgraceful. One Nation leader, Pauline Hanson, was asking whether Fatima Payman was eligible to sit as a senator, given she hadn't really checked enough with the Afghanistan's Taliban government, whether she could renounce her Afghan citizenship. Now, in response to a quite reasonable question, Payman played the race card.
The fact that you would say just weeks ago to Senator Faruqi, off back to Pakistan, you're not just vindictive, mean, nasty, you bring disgrace to the human race.
Now, then race-basing Senator Lydia Thorpe seemed to deliberately throw papers at Hanson and flipped the bird as she left before declaring sides in a seeming race war.
It's an absolute vile act against Senator Payman, and I'll have her back and any other black or brown woman in this place.
Let me remind you again that this race-obsessed Thorpe, who calls herself black, has 7 great-grandparents who weren't Aboriginal and just one who was. Meanwhile, we have Jews too scared to go down the street and pro-Palestinian extremists haranguing children and parents at a Christmas window display at Melbourne's Myers store. And where have Kim Williams and his ABC been as we crumble into these warring tribes? Well, on the wrong side of every debate. I mean, Williams himself started his talk on Wednesday like this.
I commence by offering acknowledgement to the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, the traditional custodians of these ancestral lands, and recognise their enduring connection to the land and waterways around us. I pay respect to elders past and present and to elders of other communities in Australia.
And on it goes. The ABC also cheered on The Voice. It monstered critics of multiculturalism as racist, referred to Australia Day as Invasion Day and the whole thing. I was particularly struck, though, by Williams' warning today against misinformation.
Most dangerously, it is targeting the next generation of Australian children, teenagers and young adults, compromising their confidence about and knowledge of Australian history, Australian stories, Australian accents and Australian values in ways that may harm our future.
But hang on there, Kim. It's your ABC that's rewriting our past. It's pushed hardest the stolen generations claim, despite courts not identifying even one person stolen from their parents just for being Aboriginal. Your ABC promoted Bruce Pascoe to school kids in videos falsely claiming he was Aboriginal, and Aborigines used to live in houses in towns of 1,000 people until wicked whites destroyed it all. And as for Williams personally, he also founded the Australian Film Finance Corporation, which later funded Rabbit Proof Fence, shown to a generation of Australian students, shown again on SBS last night, claiming to be the true story of how a racist official, A.O. Neville, stole 3 Aboriginal girls in his genocidal plan to breed out the Aborigine. This scene is actually fiction when you compare the film to the book on which it's based. In fact, as I've written many times, sourcing the book, other documents, Neville actually ordered the girls to be removed from their bush camp after reports they'd been ostracised for being part white, no father around, and they were in danger of sexual abuse. One was just 8 years old and already promised in marriage to a grown man. The constable took the girls, with permission of the tribe's head, and rode them out peacefully on horseback to bring them to a home where they get a schooling. Did the ABC ever tell the truth about that film's true story? Of course not. The ABC's always been on the side of division, and much as Williams may now promise that it will build our patriotism and our unity, its record tells us that will never happen. Joining me on Culture Wars is Rowan Dean, Editor-in-Chief of The Spectator Australia and host of Outsiders, here on Sundays at 9 a.m. Rowan, this argument today, give the ABC millions more of your dollars and it's going to make us more patriotic, and overlook all those divisions. Discuss.
Well, Andrew, I'm just relieved that finally there's some genuine comedy on the ABC, and who would have thought, who would have guessed that it would come from Kim Williams himself. I think they should give him a show, a comedy show, a satire show, in which he goes on about the patriotism within the ABC. I mean, hilarious stuff. That he kept a straight face shows a great acting skill there that clearly the ABC should be developing. Or he genuinely believes what he said, in which case there is no hope for the ABC. For the simple reason that patriotism, and it's like all these words, racism, and we might discuss that in a second, but patriotism, you have to define the word before you start tossing it around willy-nilly. But patriotism is basically love of country. Love of your own country, not love of a historical country of 200 years ago, but love of your own country, love of the country you grew up in, with the values that your parents had, the values that your grandparents had and fought and died for. That's patriotism. Now, patriotism can go to extremes. You can have it the one extreme. I remember a few years ago, there were people wandering around with T-shirts that says, if you don't love it, leave it. So the idea there is, if you don't love the country and every single facet of the country, then maybe you should rack off. That was one extreme version of patriotism. But I think the more mild, or the more general and generous version of patriotism is, as I said, a love of the country and the culture that you are part of. Sure, it can always be improved. Sure, that's why we have politicians and politics and ideas of advancing and moving that culture and society forward. But it has to have a bedrock belief and love of the values that you were born into. And as on one part of my family, fifth generation Australian, I can say that the values that I was born into and that my ancestors died in the First World War for are not the values that the ABC respects. The ABC is all about shame. No. You cannot be a patriot if you're ashamed of your country. And the ABC is thoroughly ashamed of Australia that I grew up in.
Well said. I mean, it has not been a uniting force. It's been a dividing one. But let's switch to one side of this division, right? And I know which side the ABC will be on. The personal abuse of Pauline Hanson in Parliament today. Was it out of order?
It was completely out of order, but not probably for the reasons that people are talking about, rudeness and carry on and all the rest of it. But it was out of order because it was so wrong. There is, as I said, the country that I grew up in, yes, it has had elements of racist, casual racism that I observed as a child and growing up as a teenager and an adult. I would call it casual racism. There was a well-known show in the 90s, Wogs Out of Work. There were insults and things, banter thrown around that used to be in the larrikin Australia that I grew up, just part of the general kind of different cultures getting together and forging a new Australian culture. But the genuine racism I have only seen in the last 12 months. And that is real, aggressive, militant, vile racism. And it is directed against specifically and solely one section of the Australian community. And that is, of course, the hatred of Jews that we are seeing. We saw it on October 8th, 9th. We've seen it with people yelling out at the Opera House, where's the Jews, or gas the Jews, or whatever it was. We've seen cars in Wallara vandalised and smashed with Jew hatred spread over them. We've seen a Christmas, so it's not just the Jews that this particular mob are against, but also Christianity and Christian decorations at Myers. We've seen endless protests and antagonism to the point where the Jewish community no longer feels safe. Australian Jews no longer feel safe in this country, Andrew. There has never been in my entire life any segment of the Australian wonderful group of cultures and races and ethnicities that make up Australia. There has never been a single instance where any segment of the Australian society felt scared and afraid for their lives from other members of the Australian community. That has happened in the last 12 months, and it has happened exclusively from one group of individuals who are aggressively have an aggressive hatred of Jews, and they are taking it to the streets. And they're the only way any parliamentarian should be standing up and attacking the word racism in Australia is to condemn the disgraceful anti-Semitism we have seen week in and week out for 12 months. That is racism. It makes every Australian sick to the stomach. And I won't hear a word from any of our political members of parliament if they are not prepared to first and foremost condemn that racism outright, Andrew.
Look, so true, so true. I must say that, you know, I think the previous example that I would go to, the racism against Chinese on the goldfields, and boy, oh boy, how long ago is that? Rowan Dean, thank you so much indeed for your time.